I'm Jenna Mitchell, 33, and last Christmas shattered my world. At our family's holiday party in Billings, Montana, my younger sister got a gleaming Tesla worth $100,000. Me, I got a cheap piggy bank with $10 stuffed inside. My dad grinned, saying, "That's our contribution to your future home, sweetheart." The room cheered for her, but I felt invisible, my heart sinking like it had so many times before. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bag, slipped into my car, and drove into the snowy night, leaving everything behind. As I hit the road, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Don't forget to pay the rent." I stared at the message, my anger boiling. I opened Venmo, sent back the $10, and typed, "Thanks for the gift." Have you ever felt treated unfairly like I did? Share your story in the comments. Looking back, my childhood in Billings, Montana, set the stage for everything that happened that Christmas. I was the older daughter always expected to be the responsible one, while my younger sister, Kayla, was the family's golden child. Our house on Pine View Drive, a cozy two-story in the suburbs, felt more like her stage than my home. By the time I was 10, I already knew my place, or lack of it. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. I'd spent weeks dropping hints about a new bike, the kind with shiny handlebars I'd seen at the store. I wasn't asking for much, just something to call my own. But when the day came, the house was quiet. My parents, David and Linda, were nowhere to be found. I sat at the kitchen table staring at a store-bought cake I'd found in the fridge. No candles, no note. Later, I learned they were across town setting up an art exhibit for Kayla's paintings. She was only 3, barely old enough to hold a brush, but they'd framed her scribbles like masterpieces. When they got home, Mom brushed it off. "Oh, Jenna, we'll celebrate tomorrow," she said, her voice distracted. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. Tomorrow never came. It wasn't just birthdays. Kayla got new dresses for school plays, private art lessons, even a custom easel when she was 5. I got hand-me-downs and a pat on the back for good grades. "You're so independent, Jenna," Mom would say, as if it was a compliment. But I wasn't independent by choice, I had to be. They poured their time and money into Kayla's talent while I learned to fend for myself. I'd spend hours in my room reading library books or sketching in a notebook I hid under my bed, afraid they'd compare it to Kayla's work and find it lacking. The only person who seemed to notice me was my grandfather, Edward. He lived a few blocks away in a small house filled with old records and woodworking tools. Every Sunday, I'd walk over, and he'd sit me down with a glass of lemonade asking about my day. "You're sharp as a tack, Jenna," he'd say, his eyes crinkling. Once he gave me a wooden bird he'd carved its wings painted blue. It was the first gift I'd gotten that wasn't practical, a treasure I still keep. But even Edward couldn't change how things were at home. He'd tried gently suggesting to Dad that I deserved more attention, but Dad would shrug. "Kayla's the artist," he'd say, as if that explained everything. One memory stings the most. When I was 12, I won a school essay contest. I was so proud clutching the certificate. As I ran home to show my parents, I found them in the living room fawning over Kayla's latest drawing, a messy swirl of colors she'd done at daycare. I stood there waiting for them to notice me, but they didn't. Finally, I spoke up. "Mom, Dad, I won something today." Mom glanced over, barely listening. "That's nice, honey," she said, then turned back to Kayla. "Look at this shading, sweetheart." My chest tightened and I slipped upstairs, tucking the certificate into a drawer. Edward was the only one who asked to see it later, his face lighting up as he read it aloud. It wasn't that they didn't love me, they just loved Kayla more. Every milestone I hit, every effort I made faded next to her. By high school, I stopped trying to compete. I focused on my studies, got a part-time job at a local bookstore, and saved every penny for college. Kayla, meanwhile, got a new laptop for her art projects and a trip to an art camp in Missoula. I'd hear Mom bragging to neighbors about her little prodigy while I was just the kid who didn't need help. But I did need something, attention, validation, anything to show I mattered. Edward tried to bridge the gap. He'd invite me to his house for dinner, telling stories about his days as a carpenter, his voice warm and steady. Once when I was 15, he pulled me aside after a family barbecue. "You're stronger than you know, Jenna," he said, his hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them make you feel small." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure I believed him. How could I feel strong when my own parents barely saw me? High school was behind me, and I was determined to carve my own path. I'd learned early that why. Ting for my parents' attention was a losing game. So, I set my sights on college not just as an escape, but as a way to prove I was more than the overlooked daughter. I applied for every scholarship I could find, spending late nights at the library, filling out forms while working shifts at a local coffee shop. When the acceptance letter from Montana State University arrived, along with a full-ride academic scholarship, I felt a rush of pride. I'd done this on my own, no help from mom or dad. College wasn't easy. I majored in data science, a field that demanded precision and long hours. Between classes, I worked part-time as a barista, then as a tutor, saving every dollar for textbooks and rent. My parents, David and Linda, never asked about my studies. Their focus was on my sister Kayla, who'd enrolled in an art program in Missoula, fully funded by them. I'd hear Mom on the phone gushing about Kayla's latest sketches or her promising future as an artist. Once I called home to share that I'd aced a coding project. Dad answered, distracted. "That's great, Jenna," he said, then pivoted. "Did you hear Kayla got a gallery showing?" I hung up. My excitement deflated. By my junior year, I landed an internship at a tech startup in Billings. It was grueling debugging code, analyzing data sets, but I loved it. My supervisor praised my knack for spotting patterns in numbers, and I started to see a future in data analysis. I'd call home occasionally, hoping to share my progress, but Mom would steer the conversation to Kayla. "She's working on a mural for a local cafe," she'd say, as if my internship was just a side note. I stopped calling as often. After graduation, I got a full-time job as a data analyst at a mid-sized firm in Billings. The pay was decent enough to move into a small apartment downtown. I'd spend evenings refining my skills, taking online courses in machine learning to stay ahead. My first big break came when I built a predictive model that saved the company thousands. My boss called it game-changing and gave me a raise. I was thrilled, thinking maybe now my parents would notice. I invited them to dinner at my place to share the news. They showed up late talking about Kayla's latest commission, a logo for a boutique. "She's so talented," Mom said, barely touching the meal I'd spent hours preparing. Dad nodded, adding her works going viral online. I swallowed my disappointment and didn't bring up my raise. That's when I met Leslie Hayes, a colleague who became my lifeline. Leslie was a senior analyst, sharp and kind with a knack for seeing through office politics. We bonded over late-night projects and coffee runs. One day, after a team meeting where I presented a new dashboard, Leslie pulled me aside. "Jenna, you're killing it," she said, her voice genuine. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." It was the first time someone saw my effort without comparing me to anyone else. We started grabbing lunch together, and she'd listen as I vented about my family. "You're building something amazing," she'd say. "They'll regret not seeing it." Her words kept me going. Kayla, meanwhile, was chasing her art career backed by our parents. They paid for her apartment, her supplies, even her trips to art fairs. I'd see posts on social media, Kayla at a gallery opening, Mom and Dad beaming beside her. Once I ran into them at a cafe in Billings. I'd just finished a long day at work and was grabbing a coffee. Mom spotted me and waved me over. "Jenna, you should see Kayla's new portfolio," she said, pulling out her phone. I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. They didn't ask about my job, my life, nothing. I left the cafe feeling like a stranger in my own family. Leslie noticed the change in me after that. Over drinks one evening, I told her how my parents' focus on Kayla made me feel invisible. She leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You're not invisible, Jenna. You're a rock star at work and you did it all yourself." That's power. Her words hit hard. For the first time, I started to believe my worth didn't depend on their approval. Leslie became more than a colleague. She was the friend who saw me when no one else did. By my late 20s, I was climbing the ladder at work, earning respect from my team. I'd present at industry meetups, even spoke at a regional tech conference. Each step forward felt like a victory, but a small part of me still hoped my parents would notice. I'd send them texts about my achievements, a promotion, a new project, but their replies were short, always circling back to Kayla. She just signed a contract with a gallery in Seattle. Dad texted once, ignoring my news. I stopped expecting more. As Christmas approached, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this year they'd see me. I poured my energy into planning gifts, thinking a family gathering might finally bridge the gap. I started early weeks before the big day. My apartment in downtown Billings became a makeshift gift wrapping station. I spent hours scouring NG local shops for the perfect presents. For Mom, I found a delicate silver necklace with a small heart pendant, something she'd mentioned liking years ago. For Dad, I picked out a leather-bound planner, knowing he loved organizing his schedule the old-fashioned way. For Kayla, I chose a set of high-end watercolor brushes, hoping she'd appreciate the nod to her art. I even got a gift for my grandfather, Edward, a vintage record of his favorite jazz artist, something to add to his collection. Each gift was wrapped with care, tied with ribbons, and labeled with handwritten notes. I wanted them to feel my effort to know I'd thought about what they loved. The process wasn't just about the gifts. I helped Mom plan the menu, suggesting her favorite pecan pie recipe and offering to bring a homemade cranberry sauce. She seemed distracted on the phone, mentioning Kayla's latest art project, but I brushed it off. "I'll handle the salad too," I told her, keeping my voice upbeat. I spent a whole evening testing recipes, determined to contribute something memorable to the table. At work, I took on extra hours to cover the cost of the gifts, juggling deadlines while picturing the family dinner. Leslie, my colleague, noticed my frenzy. "You're going all out," she said over coffee one morning. "They're lucky to have you." I smiled, but a knot of doubt tightened in my chest. Were they? As the day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. I kept imagining the moment we'd exchanged gifts, hoping Dad would nod in approval or Mom would hug me for the necklace. Maybe Kayla would say something kind about the brushes. I even let myself daydream about a toast one where they'd acknowledge my hard work, my life. It was a long shot, but I couldn't help it. Leslie tried to temper my expectations. "Just don't expect too much," she warned during a lunch break. "You deserve to be celebrated, but they might not get it." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't listening. I wanted to believe this Christmas would be the one. The morning of the party, I loaded my car with gifts and food, my trunk packed with carefully wrapped boxes and a cooler for the salad. I'd chosen my outfit days in advance, a deep green sweater and black jeans, festive but not overdone. As I drove from downtown to my parents' house in the suburbs, the streets of Billings were dusted with snow, and I felt a flicker of hope. Their house on Pineview Drive was only 20 minutes away, but the drive felt longer, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if they loved the gifts? What if they finally saw me, but a quieter voice whispered doubts? What if nothing changed? When I pulled into their driveway, I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The house looked warm, lights glowing through the windows, but my stomach churned. I'd been here so many times, hoping for something different, only to leave disappointed. Still, I pushed the thought aside. I grabbed the gifts and food balancing boxes as I walked to the door. Mom opened it, her smile quick but distracted. "Jenna, you're here," she said, already turning back inside. "Kayla's showing us her new sketches." I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine hitting me. Dad was in the living room laughing with Kayla while Edward sat quietly in an armchair, giving me a small wave. I set the gifts under the tree, arranging them neatly among the others. My cranberry sauce went into the fridge, and I helped Mom set the table, trying to catch her eye. "I made that salad. You like I said, hoping for a spark of interest." She nodded absently. "That's nice, honey. Did you see Kayla's new painting?" My heart sank, but I forced a smile. Maybe dinner would be better. Maybe the gifts would make a difference. I clung to that hope as we gathered for the meal. The table set with Mom's holiday china, the air filled with chatter about Kayla's art. Edward caught my eye across the table, his expression soft but concerned. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I didn't want to admit how much I was banking on this night. As we ate, I watched my family waiting for a moment to share my own news. A recent project I'd let at work, a small win I thought might matter. But the conversation stayed on Kayla, her latest commission, her plans for a gallery show. I kept quiet, my hope flickering, but not yet gone. I sat near the tree, watching my family, Mom, Dad Kayla, and my grandfather Edward chatting and sipping hot cocoa. The glow of string lights felt warm, but my nerves were electric. I'd poured so much into this night, my gifts carefully chosen, my heart banking on a moment of connection. We moved to the living room for the gift exchange, the tree surrounded by a sea of wrapping paper. I handed out my presents, my hands shaky with anticipation. Mom opened her silver necklace, smiling faintly before setting it on the coffee table. Dad flipped through his leather planner, muttering, "Nice, Jenna." And without Lou. King up, Kayla unwrapped her watercolor brushes, gave a quick nod, and turned back to her phone. My grandfather Edward was the only one who seemed touched, holding up his jazz record with a grin. "You know me too well, kiddo," he said, his voice warm. I clung to his words, hoping the rest of the night would follow suit. Then it was my turn. Mom handed me a small box, her smile tight. "This is from all of us," she said. I tore open the paper, my heart pounding. Inside was a cheap ceramic piggy bank shaped like a cartoon pig with a $10 bill tucked into the slot. I stared at it, confused, waiting for an explanation. Dad leaned forward, his face bright with a grin I didn't understand. "That's our contribution to your future home, sweetheart," he said, his tone proud as if he'd just handed me the keys to a mansion. The room went quiet for a moment and I felt my face burn. A piggy bank, $10. After all I'd done, all I'd given. Before I could process it, Kayla's turn came. Dad stood up, practically bouncing with excitement. "This one's special," he said, handing her a sleek envelope. Kayla opened it, her eyes widening as she pulled out a key fob with a Tesla logo. "It's in the driveway," Dad announced, and the room erupted in cheers. Kayla squealed, running outside with Mom and Dad trailing behind. I followed numb as we stepped into the cold. There it was, a brand new Tesla gleaming under the street lights worth $100,000. Kayla hugged Dad, then Mom, her laughter echoing. "You guys are the best," she said. I stood frozen, the piggy bank still in my hand, its weight like a stone in my chest. Back inside, the celebration continued. Kayla talked nonstop about her new car while Mom and Dad beamed, recounting how they'd saved for months to surprise her. I sat on the couch, barely hearing them, my mind replaying Dad's words. "That's our contribution to your future home." The phrase felt like a slap. I'd spent years building my career paying my own way, and they thought a $10 bill was enough. Edward caught my eye, his face creased with concern. "Jenna." He started, his voice low, but I shook my head. I didn't want his pity. I wanted to disappear. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to clear plates, but my hands were trembling. I pulled out my phone, staring at the piggy bank on the counter. The hurt boiled into anger, sharp and raw. I opened Venmo, typed in Dad's name, and sent $10 with a note. "Thanks for the gift." My fingers hovered over the send button for a moment, but I pressed at the action final like slamming a door. I didn't care if they saw it tonight or tomorrow. It was my way of saying I was done. I grabbed my coat and keys, slipping out the back door without a word. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the driveway where Kayla's Tesla sat, a monument to everything I'd never been given. I climbed into my old sedan, the engine stuttering in the cold, and drove away from Pine View Drive. My chest ached, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going back. Not to that house, not to that life. Billings faded in my rearview mirror as I headed toward Bozeman, 2 hours away, with no plan, no destination, just a need to escape. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't stay. Bozeman's quiet streets welcomed me as I pulled into town after midnight. I'd left everything behind: my family, their indifference, the sting of that Christmas night, and found myself in a new city, searching for a place to think. My sedan was parked outside a 24-hour diner, its neon sign buzzing softly in the dark. I stepped inside, the warmth hitting my face, and slid into a booth, ordering a coffee to steady my nerves. My hands were still shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of walking away. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of late-night travelers and a waitress humming to herself. I stared at the steam rising from my mug, trying to piece together what came next. My phone sat silent on the table. No more texts to mom or dad, no more hoping for their approval. I was done chasing a family that didn't see me. But the hurt lingered sharp and heavy, and I wasn't sure how to let it go. That's when Brandon Newman walked in. I recognized him from a tech meetup in Billings months ago, a software engineer with a quick wit and an easy smile. He shook snow off his coat and spotted me, his eyes lighting up. "Jenna Mitchell, what's got you out here so late?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. His tone was light, but his gaze was steady, like he could tell I was carrying something heavy. I managed a small smile. "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, dodging the truth. He didn't push, just ordered a coffee and settled in. We talked about nothing at first: work, the weather, Bozeman's quirky charm, but the diner's quiet hum and Brandon's calm presence pulled the truth out of me. I told him about the Christmas party, the piggy bank, the Tesla for Kayla, and Dad's careless words about my future home. My voice cracked as I spoke, but I didn't stop. Brandon listened, his expression soft but focused, no judgment in his eyes. When I finished, he leaned forward. "That's not fair, Jenna," he said, "but you're more than their mistakes. You've built a life they can't touch." His words landed like a spark. I'd spent so long measuring myself against my family's indifference, but Brandon saw something else, someone who'd fought for every step forward. We talked for hours, the conversation shifting from my pain to his own story. He'd left a small town where no one believed in his dreams, moving to Bozeman to start over. "You don't need their approval to be whole," he said, his voice firm. "Focus on what makes you feel alive. Your work, your passions, that's what matters." I nodded the idea, settling deep. I'd been a data analyst, a problem solver, a survivor. Maybe that was enough. The clock ticked past 3:00 a.m., but I didn't care. Brandon's encouragement felt like a lifeline pulling me towards something new. He scribbled his number on a napkin, pushing it across the table. "If you're ever in Bozeman, call me," he said. "You're stronger than you know." I tucked the napkin into my pocket, a small anchor in the storm of my thoughts. When we parted ways, I stepped back into the cold, feeling lighter, like I'd left some of the hurt behind in that booth. I checked into a motel nearby, the kind with thin walls and a flickering sign. Lying on the stiff bed, I stared at the ceiling, Brandon's words echoing. "Focus on what makes you feel alive." For years, I'd tied my worth to my parents' approval. But that night, I started to let go. My phone buzzed with a text from Leslie, my colleague, asking if I was okay. I replied briefly, promising to call later. Right now, I needed to sit with this new clarity. The next day, I wandered Bozeman's downtown, the snow-dusted streets, quiet under a gray sky. I stopped at a bookstore, picking up a journal to write down my thoughts. Over lunch at a small cafe, I jotted down what I wanted. A career I loved, a life I built, people who saw me for me. Brandon's advice stuck focus on my passions. Data analysis was my strength, my way of making sense of chaos. I wasn't ready to forgive my family, but I was ready to stop letting them define me. That evening, I called Brandon to thank him. "You didn't have to listen, but you did," I said, my voice steady. He laughed softly. "Anytime, Jenna, you've got this." His confidence in me felt like a gift when I hadn't expected, but desperately needed. Bozeman was just a stop, but it was where I started to see a path forward. I wasn't sure where I'd end up, but I was ready to find out. After that night in the diner, I decided to stay to build something new away from the shadows of my past. My first step was finding a place to live. I spent days scouring listings, visiting apartments with creaky floors and small windows until I found a one-bedroom unit downtown just blocks from Main Street. It wasn't much: a tiny kitchen, a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. I signed the lease, my hands steady, feeling the weight of a decision that was entirely my own. Next, I needed to sort out work. My data analyst job in Billings was stable, but commuting 2 hours each way wasn't an option. I met with my boss over a video call explaining I wanted to relocate. Bozeman's got a growing tech scene, I said, pitching a transfer to our satellite office there. She hesitated, citing logistics, but I'd prepared a plan outlining how I'd maintain my projects remotely and visit Billings for key meetings. She agreed, and within a week I was setting up a desk in the Bozeman office, surrounded by new faces and the hum of opportunity. The work was familiar, crunching numbers, building models. But the change of scenery made it feel different, like I was rewriting my story. Settling into Bozeman wasn't just about logistics, it was about healing. The hurt from my family's rejection still lingered, a dull ache that surfaced in quiet moments. I knew I needed help to move forward, so I searched for a therapist. That's how I found Dr. Ellen Lawson, a psychologist with a small practice near the university. Her office was warm with soft lighting and a bookshelf packed with titles on resilience. During our first session, I sat on her couch clutching a tissue and poured out years of frustration: Kayla's favored status, David and Linda's indifference, the piggy bank that broke me. Dr. Lawson listened, her eyes, kind but direct. "You've carried their choices for too long," she said. "Let's work on setting boundaries that protect your peace." Therapy became my anchor. Every Wednesday, I'd sit with Dr. Lawson, untangling the knots of my past. She helped me see that my family's actions weren't a reflection of my worth. "You've built a life through your own strength," she said one session, her voice calm but firm. "Now it's about owning that." I started journaling after our talks, scribbling thoughts about who I wanted to be, someone who didn't need David or Linda's approval, someone who could stand tall on her own. The hardest step was cutting contact. My phone still buzzed with messages from Mom asking why I'd left the Christmas party so suddenly, or from Dad, oblivious as ever, sharing updates about Kayla's art. Each text felt like a pull back to the life I was trying to escape. One night, sitting in my new apartment, I made a choice. I opened my phone, blocked Mom's number, then Dad's, then Kayla's. My finger hovered over Edward's name. My grandfather had always been kinder, but I blocked him too, needing a clean break. It wasn't anger, it was survival. I needed space to build a life that wasn't defined by their neglect. Leslie, my colleague from Billings, was my lifeline during the transition. She drove up to Bozeman one weekend bringing takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on my couch, still surrounded by unpacked boxes, and I told her about the move, the job transfer, and therapy. "You're doing the hard stuff," she said, raising her glass. "Most people wouldn't have the guts." Her support reminded me I wasn't alone, even if my family was no longer part of my world. We laughed about office gossip and planned a hike in the Bridger Mountains, a small step toward making Bozeman home. Work kept me grounded. The Bozeman office was smaller, but the projects were challenging, and I threw myself into them. I led a team on a new client dashboard, earning praise from my manager for its efficiency. Outside of work, I explored Bozeman's quirks, local coffee shops, a farmer's market, a bookstore where I'd spend hours browsing. Each small discovery felt like a brick in the foundation of my new life. I even started running something I'd never done before, jogging along trails near the Gallatin River, the rhythm of my steps clearing my mind. Dr. Lawson's sessions gave me tools to keep going. She taught me to reframe my thoughts, to see my family's actions as their failure, not mine. "You're not responsible for their choices," she said during one appointment, her voice steady. "Your job is to protect your energy." I clung to that, repeating it like a mantra when doubts crept in. Blocking my family wasn't easy. Guilt tugged at me sometimes, but it gave me space to breathe, to focus on what I could control. Brandon checked in too, texting to see how I was settling in. "Bozeman suits you," he wrote after I told him about my apartment. His encouragement, light but genuine, kept me tethered to the idea that I could rebuild. I wasn't ready for anything more than friendship, but his presence was a quiet comfort, a reminder that I could let people in without losing myself. By spring, Bozeman felt less like an escape and more like a home. My apartment was filled with plants and books, small touches that made it mine. Work was steady, therapy was helping, and I was learning to let go of the past. Months after settling in, I threw myself into my career with a focus I hadn't felt before. My work as a data analyst at the Bozeman office was demanding, but I thrived on it, building dashboards and predictive models that turned raw numbers into actionable insights. The tech scene here was vibrant, and I was determined to make my mark. That spring, I led a project for a local startup designing a system to optimize their supply chain. The client was thrilled, and my manager nominated me for the Montana Tech Innovators Award, a statewide recognition for young professionals. I didn't expect to win, but when my name was announced at the ceremony in Missoula, I stood frozen, clutching the glass trophy. My heart racing with pride. For the first time, I felt seen not by my family, but by a community that valued my work. The award opened doors. I was invited to speak at a regional tech conference sharing my approach to data-driven solutions. Standing on stage, I looked out at the crowd, engineers, entrepreneurs, students, and felt a surge of confidence. This was my world, one I'd built through years of hard work. After the talk, people approached me asking questions, exchanging business cards. I left the conference buzzing my phone full of new contacts, my mind alive with possibilities. Back in Bozeman, I joined a local tech meetup, a group of coders and analysts who met weekly at a brewery. They welcomed me warmly, and I found myself laughing over IPAs, swapping ideas about algorithms and startups. It was the kind of connection I'd never had in Billings. Leslie was a constant in this new life. She'd visit from Billings every few weeks, crashing on my couch and filling my apartment with her energy. One Saturday, we hiked up to Palisade Falls, the trail winding through pine forests. As we sat by the waterfall, she grinned at me. "You're killing it, Jenna," she said, tossing a pebble into the stream. "This award, the conference, you're unstoppable." I laughed, brushing off the compliment, but her words stuck. Leslie had seen me at my lowest, and now she was cheering me on as I climbed. We spent the evening cooking dinner together. Her stories about office drama making me grateful I'd left that world behind. Brandon was another anchor. Our friendship had grown since that night in the diner built on late-night texts and coffee runs. He'd moved to Bozeman for a new job, and we started meeting up regularly, grabbing burgers at a local joint or walking along the Gallatin River. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the sunset, he turned to me. "You've got this fire in you now," he said, his voice warm. "It's like you're finally free." I smiled, feeling the truth of it. Brandon didn't push me to be anything other than myself, and that made all the difference. We weren't dating, not yet, but his presence gave me a steadiness I hadn't known I needed. Building a community wasn't just about Leslie and Brandon. Through the tech meetup, I met Sarah, a web developer with a sharp sense of humor, and Mike, a startup founder who loved debating AI ethics. We started a group chat, planning trivia nights and weekend hikes. For the first time, I had friends who didn't know my family's history, who saw me as Jenna, the analyst with big ideas, not the daughter who'd been overlooked. We'd spend hours at a cafe on Main Street sketching out business ideas or just talking about life. Their support made Bozeman feel like home, a place where I could be myself without apology. My therapy sessions with Dr. Lawson kept me grounded. She'd helped me set boundaries with my family, and now we focused on sustaining my growth. "You're claiming your space," she said during one session, her pen tapping her notebook. "Keep nurturing that." I took her advice, pouring energy into my career and friendships. The award was a milestone, but it was the daily choices showing up at work, saying yes to a hike, texting Brandon a bad joke that made me feel alive. I was no longer the woman who'd left Billings in tears. I was someone new, confident in her own skin. I hadn't heard from David, Linda, or Kayla since I blocked their numbers. Sometimes I wondered about Edward, but I wasn't ready to reach out. The silence was freeing, like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. My life was full now, work, friends, a sense of purpose. At the tech meetup one evening, Sarah raised a glass to me. "To Jenna for showing us how it's done," she said, and the group cheered. I laughed, my cheeks warm, but I felt it a deep, unshakable confidence. I was exactly where I was meant to be. This was my life, and I was owning it. The summer in Bozeman was vibrant, but a shadow loomed. I'd built a life, I was proud of my career, soaring my friends a steady anchor, but whispers from Billings reached me through Leslie. She'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that my family was unraveling. David, my father, had lost his job at the construction firm where he'd worked for years, a casualty of corporate downsizing. The news didn't surprise me. The industry had been shaky for months, but it stirred something uneasy, a flicker of guilt I hadn't expected after months of silence. Leslie shared more over coffee one afternoon, her voice low as we sat in a bustling cafe on Main Street. "Your parents are struggling," she said, stirring her latte. "They're dipping into savings, but it's tight." I nodded my fingers, tracing the rim of my mug. I'd blocked their numbers, but the reality of their hardship hit hard. Linda, my mother, was picking up extra shifts at the hospital, her nursing schedule grueling. Kayla, my sister, was floundering, too. The Tesla, that gleaming symbol of my parents' favoritism, had been repossessed. She'd missed payments, unable to cover the loan on her part-time barista salary. I felt a pang, not of sympathy, but of inevitability. They'd built their lives on fragile ground. I tried to focus on my work, diving into a new project analyzing customer data for a Bozeman retailer. But the news noted at me. I discussed it with Dr. Lawson during our next therapy session, her office a quiet refuge. "You're feeling the pull of their chaos," she said, her eyes steady. "But you don't owe them a rescue." Her words grounded me, reminding me why I'd walked away. I'd spent years carrying their neglect. Their struggles weren't my burden to bear. Still, the thought of their downfall left a bitter taste, a mix of vindication and unease. Then Kayla reached out. I'd blocked her number, but she sent an email. The subject line blunt, "We need to talk." I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the delete button, but curiosity won. Her message was a torrent of anger and desperation. She wrote about David's unemployment, the mounting bills, the repossessed Tesla. "You abandoned us." She accused, her words sharp. "If you'd been here, maybe things wouldn't be this bad." I stared at the screen, my chest tight. She blamed me as if my absence had caused their collapse. The irony stung. She'd taken everything they'd given her, never questioning, and now pointed fingers at me. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called Brandon, needing his clarity. We met at a park near my apartment, the summer breeze rustling the trees. I read him Kayla's email, my voice shaking. "She thinks I'm the reason they're falling apart," I said, folding the phone away. Brandon leaned back, his expression calm but firm. "They made their choices, Jenna," he said. "You didn't cause this. You're not their savior." His words echoed Dr. Lawson's, reinforcing the boundary I'd set. I wasn't responsible for their mistakes, no matter how much Kayla tried to guilt me. Leslie weighed in too over a hike in the Bridger Mountains. "Kayla's lashing out because she's scared," she said, adjusting her backpack. "But you can't let her drag you back." I nodded, the trail's incline, mirroring the effort it took to hold my ground. My friends saw what Kayla couldn't. I'd built a life free of their dysfunction. Still, her email lingered, a reminder of the family I'd left behind. I journaled about it, filling pages with thoughts of their struggles versus my peace. Dr. W. Lawson had taught me to prioritize my well-being, and I wasn't about to unravel now. Days later, I got another email, this time from Linda. Her tone was softer, pleading. She mentioned the house on Pineview Drive, how they might lose it if things didn't turn around. "We miss you, Jenna," she wrote. "Can we talk?" I felt a twinge of sadness, but no urge to reply. Their words, Kayla's blame. Linda's plea felt like traps pulling me back to a dynamic I'd fought to escape. I deleted both emails, my resolve hardening. I'd chosen myself, and I wasn't going back. Work kept me steady. The retailer project earned me a bonus, and I celebrated with Sarah and Mike from the tech meetup, splitting a pizza at a local spot. They toasted to my success, their laughter filling the air. "You're a rock star," Sarah said, her eyes bright. I smiled, feeling the warmth of their support. Bozeman had given me a community, a purpose far from the chaos of Billings. I was thriving, not because of my family, but despite them. The guilt faded as summer turned to fall. I ran along the Gallatin River, my breath steady, my mind clear. Kayla's accusations, David's job loss, Linda's plea, they were their story, not mine. I discussed it with Dr. Lawson, who nodded approvingly. "You're holding your boundaries," she said, her voice warm. "That's strength." I felt it deep in my core, a certainty that I was enough without their approval or their blame. Brandon and I grew closer, our friendship, a quiet constant. One evening as we grabbed coffee, he asked how I was handling the family news. "I'm letting it go," I said, my voice firm. He smiled, raising his mug. "That's the Jenna I know." His support, like Leslie's and my new friends, reminded me I wasn't alone. I'd built a life that held me up, one where I could stand tall. The Coleman family struggles were real, but they weren't my weight to carry. One crisp autumn morning, as I was in my small apartment, arranging flowers for the engagement party Brandon and I had planned, we'd gotten engaged quietly, just the two of us under the stars by the Gallatin River, his proposal simple but heartfelt. The news had spread through mutual friends, and I was basking in the joy of building a future with someone who saw me for me. But that morning, my peace shattered when my doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw my family standing on the doorstep, their faces a mix of determination and unease. I froze my hand, gripping the door frame. I hadn't seen them since the Christmas party, hadn't spoken since I'd blocked their numbers. David stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Jenna, we heard you're getting married. We need to talk." Linda's eyes were tired, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, while Kayla stood with her arms crossed, her glare sharp. "Edward." My grandfather looked softer, his expression pleading. I ushered them inside, my heart pounding, unsure if I was ready for this. We sat in my small living room, the air thick with tension. David spoke first, his tone heavy. "Things have been rough, Jenna. I lost my job and we're barely holding on. We just want to be part of your life again." Linda nodded, her voice soft. "We miss you, honey. This wedding, it's a chance to start over." Kayla said nothing, her eyes darting around my apartment, taking in the plants and bookshelves I'd made my own. Edward leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Jenna, I know things went wrong," he said, his voice steady but gentle, "but family is family. Let's mend this before it's too late." His words carried the weight of years of the grandfather who'd once given me a piggy bank to teach me value. I wanted to believe him, to feel the pull of reconciliation, but the hurt was still raw. Their favoritism, the Tesla, the years of being unseen. I took a deep breath, my hands steady. "I've built a life here," I said, my voice firm. "I don't need your approval anymore." Kayla scoffed, finally speaking. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Running off Eaving us to deal with everything. Her words stung, echoing her email from months ago, but I didn't flinch. "You made your choices, Kayla," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm not responsible for your mistakes." David's face re-ended. "We're your family, Jenna. You can't just cut us out." Linda reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "You cut me out long before I left," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You gave Kayla everything and expected me to be grateful for scraps." The room fell silent, the truth hanging heavy. Edward's eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. He had seen their favoritism too, even if he'd tried to bridge the gap. I stood pacing to the window, needing space. "I've spent years trying to earn your love," I said, turning to face them, "but I don't need it anymore. I have Brandon, my friends, my work." "I'm enough," Linda's voice cracked. "Jenna, please, we're struggling, we need you." I shook my head unmoved. Their struggles were real, but they weren't my burden. I'd carried their neglect long enough. Edward tried again, his voice softer. "I just want us to be whole again," he said, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. My resolve unshaken. "I'm whole without you." I said the words final. "I wish you well, but I'm done." Kayla stood, her face twisted with anger. "You're selfish." She spat, storming toward the door. David and Linda followed their faces, a mix of defeat and resentment. Edward lingered, his eyes searching mine, but I held firm. He nodded slowly, then left. The door closed, and I sank onto the couch, my heart racing but my mind clear. Brandon came home soon after, his arms wrapping around me as I told him what happened. "You did what you needed to," he said, his voice warm. "I'm proud of you." His support, steady and unwavering, reminded me I'd chosen a family that valued me. Leslie called later, and I shared the story over the phone. "You stood your ground," she said, her voice bright. "That's strength." That evening, I met Sarah and Mike at a cafe, the familiar hum of Bozeman grounding me. They listened as I recounted the confrontation, their nods reassuring. "You've built something real here," Mike said, raising his coffee. "They can't take that away." I smiled, feeling the truth of it. My life, my career, my friends, my love with Brandon was mine, untouched by the family I'd left behind. Dr. Lawson's words echoed in my mind during our next session. "You chose yourself," she said, her voice calm. "That's not selfishness. It's survival." I nodded, journaling later about the confrontation, the weight of their visit lifting as I wrote. I wasn't the daughter who'd begged for their love. I was Jenna, whole and free. The engagement party was days away, and I focused on the joy ahead. Brandon and I planned a simple gathering, surrounded by friends who'd become my family. The Coleman family's visit was a final test, one I'd passed. I was ready to move forward, unburdened by their expectations. My future was bright, and it was mine alone. The Bozeman sky was clear and blue. It was early spring, and the mountains stood sharp against the horizon as I prepared for my wedding day. Brandon and I had chosen a small venue, a rustic barn just outside town, decorated with wild flowers and string lights. We wanted it simple, surrounded by the people who'd become our family: Leslie, Sarah, Mike, and a handful of others from our tech meetup and work. My old family, the Colemans, wasn't invited. After their visit to my apartment, I'd made peace with their absence, choosing a life free of their weight. The morning of the wedding, I stood in my apartment, slipping into a cream-colored dress that hugged my frame. Leslie was there fussing with my hair, her laughter filling the room. "You look incredible, Jenna," she said, pinning a stray curl. I smiled, feeling a warmth that came from being truly seen by someone who'd stood by me through everything. Sarah arrived carrying a bouquet she'd arranged herself, her grin wide. "This is your day," she said, handing me the flowers. Mike popped in with coffee, joking about keeping Brandon in line. Their presence grounded me, a reminder of the community I'd built. As I got ready, I pulled an old piggy bank from a shelf, the one Edward had given me as a child. It was chipped now, but it held memories of lessons about value of the hurt when my parents overlooked me. I slipped a $10 bill inside, the crinkle of paper echoing in the quiet. To me, it wasn't about money anymore. It was a symbol of my freedom of choosing myself over their expectations. I placed it back on the shelf, a quiet promise to never let anyone define my worth again. The ceremony was intimate, held in the barn's soft light. Brandon stood at the altar, his eyes bright as I walked toward him, Leslie by my side. Our vows were short but honest, promising to lift each other up to build a life together. When he slipped the ring on my finger, I felt a surge of certainty. This was where I belonged. Our friends clapped, their cheers echoing through the wooden beams. Afterward, we danced under the stars, the music mingling with laughter. Leslie pulled me into a hug, whispering, "You've earned this happiness." I nodded, my throat tight, knowing she was right. Later, we gathered around a bonfire, the night crisp and clear. I stood with Brandon's arm around me, watching the flames. Sarah raised a glass, her voice carrying over the group. "To Jenna and Brandon for building something real," she said. Everyone cheered, and I felt a swell of gratitude. These were my people, the ones who'd shown me what family could mean. I didn't need David, Linda, Kayla, or even Edward to feel whole. I'd found that within myself. As the night wound down, I stepped away to a quiet corner holding a glass of wine. I thought about the journey that brought me here, the years of feeling invisible. The Christmas party that broke me the courage to leave Billings behind. I'd rebuilt my life in Bozeman piece by piece through work therapy and friendships. Dr. Lawson's words rang in my mind. You chose yourself. I had, and it led me to this moment, surrounded by love that didn't come with conditions. I rejoined the group sitting beside Brandon. He squeezed my hand, his smile soft. Happy, he asked. More than I thought possible, I said, leaning into him. The fire crackled, and I felt a lightness I'd never known. I wasn't the girl who'd begged for her family's approval. I was Jenna Mitchell, a woman who'd fought for her own worth and won. Before the night ended, I gathered everyone for a toast. I stood my voice steady, the stars above us. I want to share something, I said, holding up my glass. For years, I thought my value came from how others treated me, my parents, my sister. But I learned something. Your worth doesn't depend on how others see you. Sometimes you have to walk away to find yourself. My friends nodded, their faces warm with understanding. Leslie's eyes glistened, and Mike gave a quiet clap. I finished, my voice clear. Here's to choosing ourselves, to building lives that make us whole. The group raised their glasses, their voices echoing mine. The piggy bank sat on a table nearby, a small reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. That $10 bill wasn't just money, it was a declaration. I'd left behind a family that diminished me, and in their place, I'd found a life that lifted me up. Bozeman, with its mountains and open skies, was my home. Brandon, Leslie, Sarah, Mike, they were my family, not by blood but by choice. As the fire died down, I looked at Brandon, his face lit by the fading glow. We'd start our life together here in a place I'd made my own. The Colemans were a distant memory, their struggles and accusations no longer my burden. I'd carried their weight for too long, but now I was free. Free to love, to grow, to be me. This was my story, and I'd written the ending. The story ends here. Now, let's listen to some music to relax.